Hello people, let's go through my watch list for next week, and we start as always on the DXY on the weekly time frame. And we discussed this last week. We had here these two bearish candles and we said this might not be the follow through we were looking for the next leg to the downside, and indeed price came back up one more time to the high. Here on the 4-hour time frame we can see here price again. It's very similar. We would expect, if that's the sell-off, we would expect a bit more impulsive price action followed by a continuation for the next leg to the downside. Instead, price is hovering around this previous high here to the left. This could be an indication that price still has enough or is looking for volume to break out to the upside. And that's actually what I'm looking for. I'm right now more leaning towards a bullish continuation structure around the high here for the next leg to the upside, and therefore I'm more leaning towards US dollar long plays again for next week. Moving on to Euro US dollar, therefore we are looking for shorts in this pair, and we can see here price action not the best here on the 4-hour time frame, but we get a potential expanding structure on this liquidity area here to the left. We have enough room to the first area of interest to the low here, and therefore I'm now looking for price coming back up, tapping at least this high one more time to then enter a short continuation in this area. Australian dollar, US dollar, of course we are looking for shorts. However, we have to be a bit more careful. Price action again is very conflicting because we had this on watch and we discussed it, how nice it really respected structure. We had here a very nice continuation structure, a V-shape recover, another continuation structure in form of a 1, 2, 3 on the lower time frames, and we are now actually, we tapped this area of interest here to the left. We still have a small gap to the value area here to the left, but we can see we have bullish price action, bullish pressure here, and this structure is not the nicest with these wiki elements here. And on the 1-hour time frame we can see here as well the structure is not really nice. However, overall it still makes sense for price to move to the downside if the DXY is breaking out to the upside. So my main game plan is actually price breaking out of the structure, breaking back in, followed by a lower time frame continuation. Then of course that would be a no-brainer. We can enter a short in this area, manage the trade to the low of the structure, at least tapping into this area, or then potentially be in the trade for the next leg to the downside. However, if we see price breaking outside, breaking above this structure here, followed by a bullish continuation, then of course I would change my bias and look for longs, which I can easily manage at least to the next inflection point here to the left. But yeah, overall we are biased more to the downside. Pound US dollar as well, we had that on watch for weeks now. We were looking initially for a long continuation, and then we discussed last week, after seeing this here, let's go to the 4-hour time frame, after seeing this 1, 2, 3 more flat structure on the more significant low here to the left, that this could be the start of a middle section for then a potential much larger structure, which then ultimately would sell off. That's something we discussed last week as a possibility. I'm still open to this idea. However, if we are looking how the DXY is positioned right now and how we are positioned here on this pair, it would be enough for price to basically come back up here in this area and forming a continuation structure here outside this here correction, and then I would enter a short here, which is enough room, or gives us enough room to manage at least to the structure low, even if price then would turn around for a larger structure. But again, on balance, I'm short on pound US dollar, and I think price does not have to go back all the way up here if the DXY is just accumulating volume on the high and breaking out to the upside. Euro New Zealand dollar, another one on the weekly time frame, we are still bullish. We were looking for long continuations in the larger, bigger picture. On the 4-hour time frame, we can see here as well, I'm still open to the idea that this is just a larger bull flag structure in the making. So price coming back down one more time, basically retesting this small high here to the left, closing the gap for a potential long continuation in this area. However, you can see here how we are positioned. We had this 1, 2, 3. We had this 1, 2, 3 into the high here to the left. Initially, price was stalling, but then we gained some bearish momentum. And where we are positioned right now on the 1 hour time frame, you can see it more clear. Let me shortly clean that up a bit. Let's go back to the 1 hour time frame. You can see it would make sense, even though for the higher time frame long, to look for a short in this area to play the last leg into the low. And if that's then the trade that breaks out to the downside, we are already in, even better. Otherwise, we just have a short 3-4 to 1 in this area. Pound Australian dollar on the daily time frame. This was also on watch already because we had this overall very corrective price action, finally broke out, started to accumulate more volume, are now in a corrective phase again, looking for a bearish continuation structure. On the 4 hour time frame, we can see it's not the best structure. We had this high here was retesting this small continuation structure here, but the area of interest is basically the high here, so we still have a gap. So it would make sense for price to come back one more time for a larger structure before we sell off. We then basically had here a nice trade in between, failed to continue to the downside and now started to really form a more complex structure. But the overall idea of a short continuation is still in place. And you can see here I have this potential 1, 2, 3 into this high here. And I'm looking actually for price to finish this leg here in form of a structure within structure for then the next leg to the downside. And if we get here a 4 hour candlestick reversal pattern, a washout candle in this area, I would entertain a risk entry. Otherwise, I would wait for price to break back in, followed by a lower time frame continuation to then enter a short in this area. Pound Canadian is a bit similar on the larger time frame. Let's look here on the daily time frame. We discussed that. So you know here we had this 1, 2, 3. We had a structure within structure, a sell-off. And we are now positioned and looking for a short continuation in this area. However, going down to the 1 hour time frame, we can see here as well, it's a slightly larger structure. So therefore, the longer it takes, the larger the structures get, the more likely price is becoming neutral. Looking at it, the higher time frame thesis for a short in this area would still make sense, but we can still try to capitalize on this small last run into the high. And here on the 1 hour time frame, if I get a proper one, another base basically here with the washout candle, I would entertain a long place here, a long entry, which is enough room to just manage the trade from here to the structure high. And if that's then the trade which breaks out to the upside, yeah, even better, we're already in. Then these yen pairs, we have to be careful with these yen pairs. The higher time frame is still, there is still room to the upside. However, the lower time frames are a bit conflicting. Here we start with Australian dollar yen. We have here this 1, 2, 3 structure into the more significant area to the left. We had an initial nice sell-off and an initial smaller continuation pattern and are now forming a slightly larger, a bit more messy structure. In terms of sequence and positioning, it still makes sense to look for a short continuation here. These lows, if that's the first base with these wiki candlesticks, is not ideal. Makes the whole structure slightly higher in risk. However, I would still look for price forming a second base, coming back up one more time. I would entertain a short in this area. Otherwise, we just wait for price to break out, break back in, and followed by a lower time frame continuation structure in this area for an entry short. New Zealand dollar yen, we had that on watch last week as well. We were looking for longs actually in this area here, and then price just continued the corrective matter and shortly broke out to tap the previous high of the structure and then come back in and is again in a corrective phase. So you can see here on, yeah, we discussed that. You can go back to the previous video in terms of like pattern evolving or whatever. So there's still a potential for a 1, 2, 3 and then price coming back up, closing the gap to this more significant value area here to the left before we then see the next move to the downside. So the overall thesis is still in place. So that means we have to be a bit careful because we are kind of in the middle of the range, and we have here a nice area of interest here. So if price is just like coming back down, breaking back in, followed by a lower time frame bullish continuation, I will entertain a long play in this area, because even though the higher time frame, or just to finish the structure, would still make sense. There's a lot of room to benefit from a long play. However, if we see price gaining bearish momentum, breaking out of this more corrective price action, followed by a bearish continuation below all of this, I would change my bias and enter a short in this area. Australian dollar Canadian on the daily time frame, we were looking for long continuations for a while now, initially in this area here. The overall thesis, again, you can see here we had a correction, short impulse into a correction, and they are both very large. So again, price is a bit neutral, therefore I'm also neutral and open to both options. Going to the 1 hour time frame, we can see here I have these two structures on. I have a larger potential bearish expanding structure on the table, and I would entertain a long into this potential short here, because as I said, I'm a bit neutral on it right now. So if we get a two-touch structure in this area, so with a nice 1 hour washout candle, I would entertain a long in this area, because price can just break out of this structure and continue long as we initially were looking. However, if we see this as a more flat structure at the end of the corrective move, and price is then starting to show some reversal structures on the 1 hour, 4 hour, then I would change my bias and look for shorts in this area. That would be a nice 1, 2, 3 as a last leg into the third touch. So that overall would also make sense. So therefore you can see I'm neutral and both directions would make sense. Canadian dollar, Swiss francs and Euro Swiss francs are also very similar. Both pairs are on all-time lows. So we have to be a bit careful in that regard. On the 4 hour time frame, we can see here, I already have the structures on. We have here a potential for a bear flag continuation, one more time for a new low before we then see a potential larger turnaround. However, in terms of sequence, we have other areas of interest here to the left, which could come into play. And when you look here, we had here an initial, basically we tapped here in this area of interest here to the left, not the all-time low here, but we had an impulsive move, the first continuation, then an impulsive move, and we are now in the next continuation. So that would make sense overall. And these continuations are basically a volume accumulation for the next move to the upside. And in terms of how this is positioned, if we get something like that, you can see here, and Swiss franc pairs tend also to do these three-touch structures fairly often. So if we see price coming back one more time, finishing this continuation structure here, I would entertain a long in this area, because that would be basically, you can see here in terms of proportion, that would be enough room, even if we just take this last impulsive leg, to break out of this structure and tapping into this a bit higher up areas of interest before we then see a potential reaction. So overall, we are looking at the bearish structure, yes, but how we are positioned right now, and if price is coming back down one more time, this would be a very deliberate bullish structure. So therefore, I would look for bullish continuations here. If price is doing neither of that and just starting to creep up into this high here, finishing the structure, I would look for a breakback in and a lower time frame short continuation. So that's the game plan for Canadian dollar Swiss francs, and Euro Swiss francs is basically the same. It is a bit more bullish because you can see here on the daily time frame, we did actually here, we did tap this low here to the left, and we have very nice bullish momentum pressure to the upside. We still have this potential expanding structure, and we have here, actually there was already an entry here. When you look at that, we had a nice impulsive move, the first correction, the next impulsive move, slightly larger correction here on the 4 hour. So this would be a valid entry for a long continuation. So here again, it's very similar. I mean, if price takes its time and forming something like that, I'm more than happy to enter along in this area. If price just creeps back up without proper structure here, then I know that's not too much volume to drive price much further. So I would then more likely look for a short continuation, price basically breaking back below these lows here to the left, followed by a bearish continuation to enter a short here for the next leg, or at least one more to the all-time lows here to the left. So that's my watch list for next week. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye bye.